been happening, and then move into our first item, which is really focused on character and community values. So really looking at, as was noted in your packet, on what is the small town character discussion and unique character. But prior to that, providing a little bit of a story of where we've been and how we got to this place where we're discussing these values, and some high level input from the survey that was done as well, that's going to feed into that discussion. And then we'll follow that with a little bit more detail on what was found in the survey. And that leads us into an areas of discussion, kind of the areas of change mapped and conversation. So we'll talk a little bit about what you learned in the survey, what you heard in the survey, what might have been surprising or your key takeaways, and then spend a little time on this new map that you haven't yet seen until this evening. So it'll be shared tonight, get some preliminary input, and you'll have additional opportunity to weigh on that as well. We'll close out with some next steps and public comment and call it a night the next 2.5 hours. There is a few things we just wanted to talk about before we jump in, and that's just that the use of the chat feature. So we have the chat on, the chat can be really useful, but we do want to try to avoid having full-on conversations in the chat, because oftentimes that can lead to us not really knowing what's being presented or being able to have that more meaningful dialogue live during the meeting. So we're just going to ask that we kind of refrain from too much chatter in the chat during the presentations, particularly. Also, of course, be respectful of each other and watch our language. All those sorts of things should go without saying. And for GPAC members, we really are going to ask that you kind of refrain from using the chat to some degree, so that we can actually have some good live conversations, and maybe ask more of the public to use the chat for comments during the time that's not a public comment period, so they're able to kind of weigh in as well. So we certainly do want you to raise your hands and be able to raise your hand physically or with the Zoom feature, but certainly want a little bit more back and forth live dialogue to the degree possible that we can do that. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt for some staff update.
Okay, hi, I'm back. Apologies, no matter how much you think you have everything in order, things happen. So Lori Brown, who's the chair, is going to be joining us in just a couple of minutes. Good evening, everyone. Matt Ramey Associates. Nice to see you all. Nice to be back here. We had our meeting last month, which was on health and environmental justice, but we haven't actually met for a conversation as a group since July. And a lot's happened since that time. And so we just want to update you on some of the activities that have been going on in the city related to the general plan. As we are going, just a reminder for GPAC members who might be joining a few minutes late, if you could rename yourself with GPAC and then your name, that would be helpful. I want to start with where we are in the process. This is that same slide that we kind of look at every time, and we are making our way through some of these key steps here. So we're really right at sort of the bridge now between the visioning phase and the alternatives phase of the process. As Susan mentioned, and as you read in your letter, we're going to be finishing up and having more conversation on the vision, which we will then revise and bring back to you. But the survey and the vision survey is also giving us a lot of information for how to start thinking about land use alternatives and transportation alternatives. And so we're gonna dip our toes into that this evening. And that will, in the next month or two, we're really gonna be diving in to the alternatives phase. So we are making our way through the process, and the alternatives phase is clearly that critical phase in the process as we are developing land use alternatives and deciding the physical form of the city in the future. Over the summer, over the beginning of summer and then into the summer, as you'll remember, we had a number of conversations on the housing element. As a reminder, the housing element moved forward ahead of the general plan due to the state requirements of when we have to have a housing element adopted. So as a reminder, we had our GPAC and public meetings on June 15th and June 29th. On July 26th, the public draft housing element was released, and then there was a city council meeting on the draft housing element on August 2nd. There was a public comment period for the draft housing element from July 26th through August 10th. And then it was sent on August 11th to the Department of Housing and Community Development, who has to review and then ultimately certify the element. This is the only element that the state gets to say, really, for the whole element, whether you've done it right or not. So we have sent that off to HCD, and our next steps are to respond to HCD's comments on the draft housing element. And then we're moving into we're going to revise the draft and then go into the hearings for the Planning Commission and the City Council with the goal of adoption by the end of 2021. The housing element, as it was drafted and submitted to HCD, is on the website. We know that there were comments from the community, and we made a lot of changes to the housing element based on community comments. We also in August, end of August through the beginning of October, had a series of pop-up workshops. The pop-up workshops paralleled the online visioning survey. They asked some of the same questions, although not as in-depth, but they were also an opportunity for us to go out in the community, really our first time for the project and since COVID started. And they were led by staff with some assistance from the Ramey and Associates team. And overall, we had 7 pop-up workshops throughout the city. These are just some images of what happened at the pop-ups. And if you see here, we had close to 300 people who stopped by and talked to us and provided input on the plan. And a lot of these folks who attended were either didn't know about the plan or really hadn't been engaged in the process so far. So these are new people who had been engaged, and it's really a good way to get out, and we're going to continue to do this throughout the process. In addition, there was a lot of additional outreach and engagement. We wanted to make sure that everybody knew about the general plan, that everybody knew that this vision survey was out there, and we sort of blanketed the community. I'd already mentioned the pop-up events. We had our educational workshop last month on health and environmental justice. There have been a number of news articles, and then there's been a lot of outreach that's happened to inform the community. And I hope everyone has seen at least some of this outreach that's happened. There were inserts in the water bill talking about the general plan and about the vision survey. City staff, the comms team, did 20 plus e-blasts and e-newsletter announcements about the general plan and activities, and we're going to continue to do that. For example, the general plan database that we're working off of that we've created during this process has over 1,000 emails already. And in this time, we sent five times we sent emails to folks. It's been in city newsletters 10 times. The Chamber of Commerce posted the survey and encouraged folks to take it. The city's economic development newsletter 5+ times. The city is creating 15 mini videos that are going to be on the website. And then we've had a really robust social media campaign. And as far as we can tell, we've reached there's been 50,000 plus hits on social media about the general plan. So we're really generating a lot of interest. And hopefully people are engaging in the process. And even if they're not engaging, they at least know that the process is happening and have the option of whether to engage. These are just some of the images of some of what's happened, the website, some of the articles, some swag that we had for the share your ideas with a little coaster, and then Lori here in one of the videos. Okay, so that's a quick summary of what we've been doing over the last few months. Again, it's been a lot of engagement with community members. That I failed to mention is we in addition went to every single community council between July and early September. So we met with every community council and including a group of residents who wanted to talk about the downtown. So kind of a mini focus group with a group of residents. And so we informed them about the process and talked about areas of where they wanted to see physical change in their community. So we've been doing a lot. We've been out there a lot, even though that we all haven't met as a group very much in this time period to talk. We've been out and now we're taking this information and we're going to feed it to you and bring it back to you and we can have discussions about it. Any questions about the outreach that we've done in these staff updates? outreach or any of the staff updates. You can go ahead and from GPAC members, you can go ahead and use the hand raise feature or wave, and hopefully we can see you. No, nothing? Okay. Great.
I had a question. Sorry, Matt. Sorry. I was wondering if there's anything else that you're doing in other jurisdictions to do outreach that you're not doing in Ventura, or is this pretty much the typical outreach programs?
Well,
understanding obviously COVID has changed that opportunity.
Yeah, actually, we're just with the pop-ups, we're doing pop-ups here and we're not doing them in other communities. We are doing a lot of the similar things of reaching out to different community groups. Here we're looking at the community councils, but there's also more that we are going to be doing. This is not, the end of our outreach and engagement, as we mentioned at the last GPAC meeting when we're talking about environmental justice and health. We're going to be reaching out to groups in those affected areas and have more focus groups and really try and focus more on some of the community members who may not be as comfortable participating in one of these meetings. And then we're going to have some more focused meetings about different geographic areas of the city. So we are going to have a lot more coming up. We did have the vision survey out, and we actually used a new tool that which was more interactive for mapping. And so that's actually something that we haven't used in other communities that we're using here. But as always, you all are experts on the community. You know the community well. If there's anything you think we should be doing, any events you think we should attend, groups we should talk to, absolutely let us know. We're always open to ideas.
Josh has a question.
Josh.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Matt. The question I have is, I saw that we had about the 6% of where respondents live that do not live in Ventura. I'm guessing that maybe they worked in Ventura, but I guess that was my only clarifying question, is how much weight do we do with that? And if there's anything you can just add to that, or if that's coming later, that's fine too.
Yeah, it's coming later. And we can, let's remind me if we don't answer that to talk about that, if you could.
Thank you.
It'll be better in context. Okay. Thank you, Josh. Louise.
It's like Louise.
Yeah.
I was just curious, was there any effort or are there any future thoughts about outreach to non-English speaking communities?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. One of the events that we did was was it Taco Week? I'm blanking on the name. And so we were there. And part of the work that we're going to be doing on the health and environmental justice work is going to be on the west side, where we know that there's a higher percentage of monolingual Spanish speakers. And so we're actually talking with someone who's going to help us go out into the community and do more engagement. In addition, as part of the process, we have there was a survey on safety and resilience, and Cause, who's a local organization, helped us reach out to community members, particularly Spanish-speaking community members. But again, if there are folks you want us to talk to, if there are other organizations, other ways, please let us know. And the next phase is, talking about health and environmental justice, which were some of the issues that really came up a lot on the West Side Community Council meeting, would be really helpful. Okay, any other questions? Great. Let's move on to the next section. And I think, Josh, we're going to be able to answer your question here. I'm going to start with an overview of the visioning survey. And the reason that we're going to do an overview first, and then we're going to talk about the two, have our two separate conversations tonight. One is on the vision itself, the vision statement, and the continued conversation about character and small town character, unique character and small town character, and then also the more physical land use changes that were in that survey. And we're going to just provide the overview because we're going to pull from pieces of the survey results for both of those conversations. To start out, the purpose of the survey was there were multiple purposes. One was to provide additional comments on the community values, which evolved out of existing general plan vision statement, and then comments made by the GPAC, and then you all reviewed the community values, and we wanted to get additional input on those community values from the public. We also wanted to identify locations for new development and potential land use changes in the city. We wanted to ask questions to the public about development ideas that this group raised. For example, this group brought up, should we allow duplex, triplex, and fourplex in single family areas? Should we allow development and should we incorporate certain areas that are in the county now into the city? And what do we do about industrial areas? And should they stay industrial or should we allow some residential? These were all questions that the GPAC brought up that we asked in the survey. We also wanted to identify any other, some other physical improvements in the city that can help the quality of life, including parks, trails, open spaces, and transportation. We're not really going to focus on those too much tonight in the meeting, but they were in the survey, as you saw with the results. And then we're going to use this information to advance our discussion about the vision and community values for the general plan, to identify areas of change or areas of discussion for the land use phase, and then more specifically, where there are desired land use changes in specific geographic areas of the city. Some of the basic survey statistics, the survey was open from August 24th through October 3rd, and there were a total of 24 questions on the survey. 2 of the questions were about community values, prioritization, and then an open-ended question. 5 were about citywide kind of questions about areas of change, about if you wanted to see new development in different areas. There were 6 geographic specific questions. For example, the annexation was a geographic specific question. And then we had 11 of the questions to better understand who the survey respondents were. Overall, there were about 1,500 people who started in on the survey and answered at least one question. And I just got a little flicker that my internet is unstable. So if you can't hear me, please, someone please chime in and let me know. And overall, 874 people went all the way through the survey, answered the questions, and clicked submit, which is how you really enter the final survey. Not every respondent answered every question. And as you will see when we go through the survey results, we identify how many people answered that specific question. So we're transparent on the number of people. Just the sort of comment about the survey, which is that the purpose of the survey is also to inform recommendations made by this group and decisions made by the city council. So this is a data point for all of you. It's not the answer. And we use this, and you'll see we're going to use this information to help our thinking, to challenge what individual thinking is, to affirm what you believe right now. But it's a data point, it's information. The survey is not statistically valid. It's not intended to be statistically valid. And we did know that as we got through the survey, and we knew this going in, that there were going to be some challenges with the survey. So one, it was long. We knew it was a long survey. It took a while to go through and to answer the questions, and it required thought. Our feeling on this is that we're really asking questions now about the future of the city. And 3 yes and no questions, while it may be easier, we may get more respondents, it really doesn't give us the information we need. So we had to dive into detail. We also know that the survey was a little bit hard to complete on some mobile devices. And we apologize for that. It's a function of technology. We did encourage people to use a tablet or a computer, but we do know that not everyone has that. And so we did try to supplement some of that with some of the pop-up workshops that we're doing, which we're just now getting the results for, and we'll give those to you later as well. But we did recognize these limitations. We also recognize that when we ask people to put a pin on the map for something, that location, sometimes people would zoom right into a parcel and sometimes people wouldn't. And so the geographic specificity, we need to sort of zoom out. And so we show the responses not as specific points, but we show them in what we call heat maps. And there's an example of a heat map here on the right, which is the more responses, the more pins in an area, the darker it is. And so we look at these maps and understand the patterns of how people answered the questions. And again, that's how we want to use this, not the 12 people said yes to something. It's really that this is directional to give us information. There were other responses that are represented through pie charts and bar charts. And then there were some open-ended questions. We summarized those briefly in the text, in the results, and then we attached all of the responses, 60 plus pages of responses to that. And, please, people spent the time to write those, and we are reading every word of those, and we'd encourage everyone to at least look through and skim those. And then we asked the question just very broadly, who took the survey? And what we found is that with the results that the respondents were predominantly older. 62% were over the age of 50. They were mostly white, 79%. Again, this is not consistent with the overall demographic. And we know that, which is why we're looking at these results. A lot of people have lived in Ventura for a long time, 70% over 10 years. 78% were homeowners and 76% lived in single family homes. There was, as you can see in the map on the right, pretty good geographic distribution throughout the city about where people took the survey. But we use this information. The reason we're presenting it now is because we want you to think about who took the survey as you're looking at the results. Sometimes because of that, you might look at the results and go, yeah, I get it. And other times you might look at the results and say, wow, maybe, this is predominantly, older white homeowners who have been here for a very long time and live in single family homes. And, you look at the results and you're like, that might be surprising. So that's why we give you this information. So again, it's a data point for us to understand. So that's the kind of the overview. And now the first section we really want to talk about is the core values and discussion. Oh, and actually, before I get to that, I'm going to answer Josh's question. There were, I think, 6% of the people who identified as 94% said they lived in the city and 6% said they didn't. We don't know who those 6% are. But overall, when you look at the numbers, you're going to see it doesn't necessarily skew the results. If we had a high percentage of people, 20, 30, 40%, we would be a little bit concerned. But, at this point, we're not with that. We could pull those out of the data, but it could be people who work in the city. And we do feel that those opinions could be valued and very valuable as well. So again, given that it's not a high percentage, so it wouldn't, and this isn't scientific, so we're looking at direction here and not specificity. We think that it may just be employees, and it's probably good to get that input.
I also wanted to make sure you saw the question in the chat. Someone asked, a few folks completed the survey this last weekend after October 3rd. Are these entries discarded or still available to influence the GPU?
There's always opportunities to input and provide input in the process. This survey is closed because we have to stop it at this point, but this is just leading to the next phase, of work. Okay, so let's jump into the vision and the core values discussion. I want to tee this up because in July when we met, we talked about the vision and the core values. And there was a request by the GPAC, by multiple members of the GPAC, to dive into some of these topics further in this conversation further. So that's why we're doing it this evening. This shows the flow of how we're developing the vision. In April and May, we had a public workshop where we presented the existing vision statement from the general plan, and we asked for community feedback and input on that vision statement. And so, so we then took that information, the existing general plan vision and the information from the community. And the team in June wrote the core values and general plan strategies. And I'll show those in a minute. We presented those to the GPAC in July at the July meeting, and you all provided a lot of information and a lot of feedback on that. We then revised not the strategies, but just the core values and included that in the visioning survey. And in the visioning survey, we asked for feedback on those core values and then a prioritization, which you'll see was difficult for folks to do, but just because they liked everything. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to have our conversation this evening, continue the discussion about the vision, and then we are going to go off and write a draft vision statement to then present to this group based on what we've heard. It's going to be a draft. After that, after some back and forth with the GPAC to a spot where you all are comfortable with it, we're then going to take it to the council and have the council review what is done and what this group came up with. So that's the flow of work. As a reminder, the vision statement is going to be comprised of 3 different components. An actual vision statement, which will be a couple of paragraphs describing the future, the core values, which you all have seen, which are the values of the community that help guide the plan. And then we have the strategies, which are the way that the vision and the core values are implemented throughout the general plan itself. These are the core values that we presented in July. And not to go over them, but the term that I think got the most conversation was the phrase small town character. So we'll dive into that a little bit more this evening. These are the core values that we presented according to these 6 categories. And we're going to continue working on this after this meeting based on the input that we received from the community and from you all in July. So some of the feedback that we heard, just a quick summary from the GPAC, from the last GPAC meeting, GPAC number 6. Overall, there were questions and recommendations to have clearer definitions of diversity, equity, and small town character. There was the recommendation to remove the term thriving economy and that nature needed to be incorporated in some way. There were also a lot of recommendations about what should be added, including family-oriented beach community, transparent government, carbon neutrality, access to nature, and other. We also got a lot of additional information on the strategies. A lot of topics here. I think there were a lot of comments on all of the strategies that were mentioned, but I think the ones that really had the most focus were transportation, equity, and then open space and climate change. So those were the ones that I think received the most comments and input and discussion from the GPAC. And again, we'll bring a revised version back to you for discussion and comment. In the survey, we asked about, we presented the community values that you had seen and then we revised. And we asked community members to pick their 3 most important community values. And these are the results here that you see in the survey and the number of people who voted for them. And so the one that received the most was the unique character of the community, that was most important, followed by access to nature and open spaces, and then a balanced growth. So those were the top 3. However, you can see they were pretty well distributed throughout the rest of them, with the exception of engagement and maybe innovation. And I think it's not because those aren't important, but I think they didn't rise to the top as something that people felt was one of the top 3 priorities. We had an open-ended question, and we got a lot of other comments on the community values. One that we probably heard the most was that a lot of people liked a lot of the values, and they were really having a hard time picking which ones. And I think that's okay. We're not going to necessarily prioritize the community values in the general plan, but we really use this to kind of gauge where the community is relative to these values. And so it's, we got great information. I think, it potentially reaffirms some of the conversations that you all have had with what's most important. But then we also got a lot of other information which will feed into both the community values as well as the strategies. And some of them are here. Infrastructure and water supply did come up a lot, family friendly, mental health, and the business growth all really came up quite a bit. So now we want to actually get into what I mentioned previously about having a little bit of a free form discussion and see if we can dive deeper into some of the questions that we felt were the most most warranted the most further conversation with this group right now. And the first is, what are the elements of a small town character that we should preserve or aspire to? And I'll preface that, and I'm going to turn it over to Susan in just a minute to facilitate the conversation. But I want to preface that by saying that even the term small town character was a challenge for some folks because the city is 110,000 people. And there may be aspects, and again, I'm repeating back what some of you had said, which is that there are elements that you like that make it feel small for you. And so what we want to do is dive into and dig deeper into what are those elements, rather than use a phrase like small town character, which means different things to different people. We want to know more specifically, what does it mean to you as a GPAC member and the people you know? What does that phrase mean? And then the second, which does relate to it, is what does the unique character mean? As you saw in one of the previous slides, unique character was the top vote getter in the community value. And again, this is something that means different things to different people. So we want to know what it means to you in as much specificity as you can provide. And then, of course, we want any other comments that you have, any other thoughts that you've had since the last meeting in July that you think would help us with that vision. So Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate the conversation. I'll jump in when I need to, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay?
Great. So Matt teed it up pretty well. We want to kind of break these into two different conversations and really start first on the small town character. Back in July, we just started scratching the surface on what some of those nuances are. But as Matt noted, we really want to dig into what small town character actually means rather than worry about the phrase small town character, but what are those features about that term that resonate with you as individuals or what you've heard from folks in the community. And so we want to recognize and try to get as many voices in this conversation as possible. So if you can make your comment, but also try to make it somewhat brief to make sure that we're getting comments from everybody. So anyone want to start by raising your hand and get the conversation going? I may call on folks as well if we're not seeing a lot of participation. So start with Nicholas.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and it goes to the heart, I think, of what it is that draws people to us, to this community. I am surprised, actually, at how many photographs of older Southern California communities I've seen that I think, oh, there's Ventura, and then I look closer and I realize, no, it's not Ventura. It's the town center of Orange, or the town center of some other city in California that started in the late 1890s and flourished in the 1920s. So we do have this idea that we're a really unique place. And I think for me, the heart of that is our geography. We are in a very interesting location, squeezed between hills and beach. And the setting makes it a very unique place to live. The climate is amazing. The very weird way that we've grown and stretched out from the downtown and washed out across the east side. And everybody realizes, I think, as you move east, things start to get more and more homogeneous as the community develops around the car. So the character of the place, I know there's a lot of older buildings that we enjoy. I honestly don't think our architecture is all that unique. I think that we are a lot like other communities in Southern California, but our geography is amazing.
Thanks, Nicholas. And we can come back to, and if you have additional thoughts too. We have a number of folks with their hands raised. I'm just going to go in order and just letting Trevor, as a member of the public, will probably wait. We'll need to wait for your comment until public comment, but certainly feel free to paste it into the chat. We'll go Josh, and then Pete, and then Kyler.
Thank you, Susan. Just for clarification, are we just discussing the first question or both?
We're trying to focus on small town character, but certainly if that to you is also about you being unique, then feel free.
No, that's all right. I can follow the rules. I like you. So we'll start with this. Being from San Diego and moving here, I had the opportunity to live in Los Angeles, and there was absolutely no way in hell that you would ever get me to move there. Like, this is why I love that the community the way that it is. So I think compared to other cities, a lot of times that's why it feels the way it feels and why we say the phrase the way we do. And when I look at it and I think about how, I chose this place to live, a lot of it came down to kind of the way that the people are, and that feeling of that blue collaredness, the not stuck up, beach community, how everybody's generally open-minded. Just looking at how we did with COVID and how much better we did than most of the counties around the state. Most of us are educated. Most of us take our time to find the facts. Those are the qualities that when I think of that phrase that came to mind first, it wasn't until I got educated on another level that I suddenly was like, I don't like that phrase so much. But that's why I love Ventura, why I chose to live here. And that's all I've got. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Pete.
Yeah, I put them, I thought about this one, but first of all, I'd say basically not 5, 6, or, even more story, 100+ unit apartment buildings. That's just not us. That's not Ventura, or not the Ventura I've known in the past. Also neighborhoods, as I thought about it, we have numerous neighborhoods. We have the West Side, we have the Pierpont area, we have downtown, we have Midtown around the hospital, college area, and just, you can go on and on.
So when you say neighborhoods, Pete, and we're talking about small town character, is it the character of the neighborhoods, the diversity of the neighborhoods, the strength of the neighborhoods? What is it about neighborhoods the neighborhoods here?
Probably like the general locale of the neighborhoods. You've got areas that are tied together, like maybe a walkable area in a neighborhood. Like if you look at kind of the downtown transitioning into the midtown along Santa Clara, you've got a small grocery store, you've got a coffee shop, you got walkable small areas that, you can spend a lot of time in that area. You leave it for other things, but you can live basically in that area. So those are the things I think about neighborhoods. And then I'll go back to what I said at one of the very first meetings when this was asked. We don't want to be the San Fernando Valley. We don't want sprawl. We don't want, I don't want a strip mall in every corner kind of thing. That's not the Ventura that I know and have known in the past.
So when you think of small town character, those are images that don't come up, that you'd rather not.
Correct.
Great, thank you. Let's go Kyler, then Aaron, then Daniel.
Great. One of the characteristics of a small town that I'm one of the people that doesn't really know what small town character really would mean, but one characteristic I can imagine that's worth preserving is just the walkability and the access to amenities that we have. I think it's very rare to be in Southern California, and the fact that my bike commute to work is faster than a car commute would be. And same goes for my wife. Her access to her job is also easier to bike than it is to drive. And there's very few places in Southern California that allow that, as well as access to coffee shops, amenities, and things like that. So that's my answer.
Terrific, thank you. Erin.
I'm unmuted. Okay. So first off, I would echo a few things that Josh had said, that in general, Ventura feels like a fairly friendly place where people are more unpretentious than surrounding areas. I appreciate that. I don't know how the general plan could foster that sort of a feeling, but partly I think that when you're in a small town, you feel like you are part of a community. And I think that perhaps the idea of like the different neighborhoods If you have areas to gather and collaborate and kind of recreate together, creates communities within our larger community. So I think allowing people to have that sort of a space and opportunity to interact with each other and kind of create sort of micro communities within our larger community would foster the small town feel. And then I also would agree that huge apartment buildings built straight up to the sidewalk with no trees or any sort of vegetation, that's not Ventura. It's not what we're all about, you know? And that's basically it for me.
Awesome, thank you, Erin. Let's go Daniel and then Doug.
Thanks, Susan. Just an observation. The current general plan has a commitment to small town character. What are they doing right to maintain that all these years? In other words, I agree with Pete. We're not strip malls. We're not large housing complexes. And like what Aaron said, we shouldn't build our apartments out to the street like they have on Thompson. Those are just some of the comments I've been thinking.
So then, Daniel, when you're commenting on certainly what Ventura is not, when you think of the character, the small town character in your mind, what are some features of that in Ventura as it exists today?
Well, it is. I live downtown, and so I can do everything I need to downtown basically without going to the mall. I can get to the store. I can get to a coffee shop. I can get to many coffee shops. There are restaurants on Main Street. So for me, and since I'm disabled, I'm also able to take the paratransit access program, not so much the bus. So
it's having that access and the ability to get those services and amenities.
That's right.
Thank you. Go Doug, then Bill, then Philip. Oh, Doug, I think you're muted still.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to share that I think a lot of us have been to small towns that don't have nearly the small town feel that Ventura has, and towns that are actually smaller and maybe more central, maybe just a few blocks long. And yet Ventura, I think, exhibits much more of a small town feel. And what I would characterize that small town feel being is it's the people, it's the passion of the people and the interconnectivity of the people. And how does a city foster that? I think you foster that by allowing people's voices to matter and by keeping people involved and knowing that their passion can be amplified by working with others in their community to make their community the best it can be. I also think that not succumbing to what the world has succumbed to for the most part, at least most of the United States, and that's really succumbing to the same old homogenized developments and neighborhoods that we've seen spring up for the last 50 to 70 years. I think allowing those to become more unique, the ones that have sprung up, allowing those to become more unique and have more walkable amenities close by to them or bikeable amenities close by to them. So, but I think it really is about the people in the closeness. Everyone's here is connected, and you don't go anywhere without running into somebody, really, if you live in Ventura. That's unique. We don't see that everywhere.
Great, thank you, Doug. And just a note to Casey, we certainly do want to hear from you, but during this period, it's just GPAC members that can speak. We do want to hear from you maybe in the public comment period or put your comment in the chat for now as well. Thank you. Go Bill, then Philip.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump on, I guess, a little bit what Doug had said. Is I know we talk about the neighborhoods and everything like that, which makes each area special, but I think what actually makes Ventura unique is it's the city of two rivers. And so we are not connected to Oxnard. To get to Oxnard, there are only four ways: either go to LA Avenue, the 101, Victoria, or Harbor. is the only way. So we're kind of an island unto ourselves. I think that's what makes it more unique. Now, I've got to say, I'm also not a fan of the term small town. I mean, I think it's important that we all realize that Ventura is the 279th largest city in the United States. It is the 61st largest city in California. I mean, we have problems that big cities have. We have, issues with the unhoused. We have infrastructure problems. The city is 155 years old. I just don't want us to lose track of that also in terms of these issues that we have. But again, I think a lot of it is the two rivers, that give us that feel that we are, separated from our neighbor to the south, and neighbor to the north is really Carpinteria and then Ojai, and then Santa Paula. So there's just those physical distances on it. So I think that's what makes us feel, unique.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for pointing out the population size. I think that's one of the reasons it's important that we kind of dig into what is really meant when people say small town character, kind of what images conjure up when you think about that for Ventura. So go Philip, then Sabrina, then Dana.
All right, yeah, thank you. So a couple of quick hits here. I think one of the things that I think is unique for Ventura in terms of small town is just sort of this process. I mean, you got 20 some people who are active members, plus lots of folks in the community who aren't active members, but they're certainly willing to give their input. And we all sort of generally agree on things we're talking about. So there's not a lot of disagreement, a lot of comments made about the community input. And I think that's important, that we also recognize each other. The notion of being a big fish in a small pond, somebody mentioned that to me once. That's kind of what Ventura is like. We're not famous, but you do see your city council members, you see each other in the street. And I think that's an important aspect of a small town. And the second, just sort of a little point, because I've been in big cities, is even though people might disagree, it's not that hard to park around here. I mean, I've been in big cities, LA and San Diego, and it's this nightmare. I'm not going anywhere because I can't find a place to park. So, it's a small thing, but it does make a difference when you're thinking about what's a small town. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Philip. Sabrina?
I just would piggyback on some of what was already said. I think the small locally owned businesses that we do not have a lot of chains here. And even those chains that do exist tend to be more regional chains. They're not, the sort of big box things. I think it's great that we have so many businesses that are owned by local residents. We have strong neighborhoods, including our community councils, which have been around a long time and engage people and keep them connected to their neighbors. And this might sound weird, but I think we don't really focus so much on efficiency, which I think has kind of made this community more interesting. We don't center all of our commercial areas in only one place. It's sprinkled around town. And so that has made for pockets of activity as opposed to just one or two centers of, like you have the mall, but aside from the mall, you don't really have these places where people just get in their car and park and walk in. Most of the time you walk around on streets and you engage with your neighbors if you're going downtown, or if you're on the East End and you're going to some of the retail establishments. And then because I always mention schools, I would just say that I think the other thing is that we have smaller schools. We have neighborhood schools. And if you look at, say, Oxnard, by comparison, their average school size is much bigger than our school. And that makes for built-in communities. And again, that is not efficient, right? There are a lot of people who would argue that we should have bigger schools, they're cheaper to run. But I think having maintained for a long time that system, it has really kept our community engaged. And then lastly, I'm not from here. I moved here 15 years ago, but I am always shocked by the number of multi-generational Venturan families I run into. People who not just they grew up here, but their parents grew up here and their grandparents were here. And I really feel like that connection to multi-generations is very strong here in a way that it isn't in other communities. And that makes the housing thing tricky, right? Because then you have to figure out how to perpetuate that. So anyway, those are my ideas.
Thanks, Sabrina. And interesting observation on the schools to bring that in, the neighborhood school piece. Dana, then Steph Carver.
Yes. So thank you, Susan. One of the things that I've been noting every time you come back up at asking this question is this your background behind you. that's part of what the small town feel is. I don't know, when I think of, and I agree, I'm not crazy about that term, but I think about that particular downtown view and the view right down to the ocean. There is just something that feels, it's not, the geography, I'm fascinated by what people have said about that. I hadn't thought about that before. I'm loving this conversation. It feels really, there's a depth that we're getting to. And so I just am sort of noting a few things that people have already said. One, I forget who said it, but there is something unpretentious about a smaller town. And I love that word. And that is what feels, one of the things that I love about it. Sometimes there's some edginess to that. And also, but there's just not the preciousness of some kind of overdeveloped Southern California town. So I think there's a difference there. And I could go on. I will simply stop here with the other thing is, having lived in cities that are larger and smaller, sweet, merciful heavens, I can't believe how accessible parking is and how cheap. Oh my gosh. So that also, and I know it's different. Sometimes you can't park outside your own home, but when I'm going someplace, it just gobsmacks me, from anyway. So those are my things so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. We'll go Steph Carba, then Louise, then Stephanie.
Yeah, I absolutely love that Philip brought up parking. I'm going to go and also highlight that is like absolutely makes us a small town. Like the parking structure by law, the day that they make us pay for that is the day that Ventura is no longer a small town. It's like an amazing feature in a downtown area to have free parking. That's just like wild. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say was like, Ventura is one of the few places like you can lose yourself in a big city. Like I genuinely feel like sometimes I can't go out in public and not see someone I know, which is like good and bad. But like I genuinely, like whether it's the bike path, grocery store, farmer's market, just like out and about, I like run into someone, which is like, I makes itself a small town. And it's just like, it's a very, at least where I live in Montalvo, like it's very neighborly. Like my neighbor's kids are constantly jumping over the fence, running into my house. Like, it's just like, neighbors are saying hi. Like that could just be a function of who I am and how open I am. But like, I don't know, I've never lived in a place that's that like, yeah, it's like I'm in the country or something, but I'm in a city of over 100,000. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go Louise and then Stephanie.
I grew up in a small town where my entire town population was probably the size of like Ventura High School's graduating class. So, and the feeling that I had growing up there, I've experienced in other places, and it really doesn't have anything to do with size so much. I felt it in the north end of Boston in the 80s, felt it in Eureka in the 90s. And then I feel it here. And what it seems to be is it centers around a feeling of not just community, but belonging. People, and there's two ways to belong, right? People have roots here. They grew up here. They went off to school. They came back. They're raising their children here. And I think, Sabrina summed it up when she talked about the multi-generational aspect of so many Venturans. And I think, that the general plan needs to look at that through, jobs and affordable housing so we can keep that multi-generational aspect going. The other way that people develop belonging is that they feel that they can develop and grow roots here. And that means that we've got to have places to gather. We've got to have stable neighborhoods. And again, mention, Sabrina, what she mentioned is pockets of activity that encourage engagement. And the general plan can help develop that and help sustain that through, infrastructure and traffic flow and walkability, and then land use and aesthetics and the like to keep all of that going.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie.
So when I think of small town character, to me, it's about the culture. That's to me what drives the small town feel, right? Is the culture. of the town. And I think so many people hit on that. It is about the relationships. It's about the people. It's about the engagement of the community. And it's about the accessibility and authenticity. And so to me, it's far less about the buildings and what all of those look like. Although, yes, there are things that are really great here in Ventura. But I think it's more about that culture that we set up and that engagement that our citizenry has in working with each other, working on issues. One of the things that amazed me when I moved here was the accessibility that a citizen has to get engaged on an issue. For instance, like homelessness, or, to speak out about an issue that's going on around town. And I think that we've seen that over and over, particularly in the last couple of years, with these, citizen-led kind of initiatives that have come forward. And I think that that's a big part of what small town feel is. I think that also has a little bit of a downside sometimes, because sometimes the small town feel, we look past some of the things that maybe aren't so great about our community, and we're a little bit more fearful of change than maybe we could be. And one of those things is, and this may be a very unpopular thing to say, but I feel like I need to say it and address it, is there is still a little bit of a polish that needs to be put on our town. It's not as polished as it could be. And I think that sometimes that small town feel kind of protects that, because we don't want to make those kinds of changes.
Thank you, Stephanie. Pete, before I go to you, I just noticed that we've heard from almost everyone from the GPAC that's on right now, but I just want to maybe make space for, looks like Casey, Alejandra, and David Comden. Your faces are popping up at me, so if there's anything that you wanted to add. Casey, since I called on you just now, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. I've been thinking a lot, our homework was to think about what small town character means. And I think for a lot of interns, it really just means resistance to change. And I'm in the middle there. I think that there's really good things that we could change about our city, but I also don't want to see Ventura change. So I think that's like the biggest issue that we have as a GPAC is how do we address our issues like affordable housing and climate change while minimizing the way we change our city. I don't have a solution, but ultimately the small town feel really does just feel like it is minimizing the way that we change our city.
In some ways, it seems like a lot of what people have been talking about are things to protect as well going forward. So that sense of community, that relationships, the opportunity for participation, some of the way the physical character that the city has been designed that it provides access and provides really an ability for people to gather, those sorts of things. I think some of that is protection and some is kind of putting policies in place for how you do change or grow. Lori, I see you have your hand up, and then Alejandra.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to let everyone speak. I was just holding to the end because I didn't want to.
If you want to hold to the end, that's okay. We still want to have a conversation about unique characteristics. So I think we have a little more time on this item, right, Matt? We can give.
When I say end, I don't mean the end of the meeting. I just meant after everyone's said all their comments as it relates to this specific question.
Okay, if you want to hold that, then we'll see if it looks like Alejandra and then David Comden, just making sure I get everyone who hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I think it's that community feeling, right? That we know our neighbors, we know our areas, and I'm also one to kind of be like I don't want it to change, but Ventura has changed, right? The number it's been growing, and we are different. We now have a parking structure. We didn't have a parking structure, but I like the sustainability, the sustainable growth that the city's had. Like we've been changing, but we've been sustainable with our changes. Like we changed a little bit here, and we were able to adapt to those changes and then change a little bit more. So I think if we continue to do that, have a sustainable growth, we'll still get that community feeling to stay and have that build those micro communities and neighborhoods and keep that sense of belonging. But I think we just have to grow in a sustainable manner.
Thank you. David?
Hi.
I want to be a little more ethereal and use the word kindness. This is a community where people know each other. A lot of that has to do with the longevity that people have in this community. When you are in a place a long time, you know more things about it, you know more people. I think the community here really appreciates what they have. And so they're more communicative, they're more willing to work on solutions together and help each other. I follow real estate trends. My wife's a realtor, but for instance, I noticed that each month the city of Simi Valley, which is about 10% larger than Ventura, has twice as many homes for sale each and every month, which tells me the turnover there is significantly higher than here. And there's a reason for it. We have fantastic weather here. It's proximate to a lot of places. We have a green belt buffer that allows us to breathe. The survey that was shown earlier, the number 2 element was access to open space. I think people really enjoy that here. Here's a list of my neighbors on the block that I was given 20 years ago, and 3/4 of them are still here. So that kind of points the way to what I'm speaking of. People want to live in a community that's safe for them, that they feel that they can walk in with their children, that they can bike in. We've discussed all these things. These are the things that I think make us somewhat unique. However, other areas have similar things, but I think community involvement in this community is greater than in many others, in large part because people stay here, they appreciate it.
Thank you, David. So I want to recognize Lori, and then after Lori makes a comment, I know we've got a few people that still have their hands up. I want to kind of transition into the other question of uniqueness. So if it could kind of fold that into some of your comments too. So what makes it Ventura unique, along with kind of this idea of a small town character? We're certainly not trying to define it right here this evening and all agree on a definition. It's really kind of collecting all these thoughts so that we can take it to the next level and create a definition that you can then maybe respond to. So go ahead, Lori.
Thank you, Susan. I just first want to say that I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing today. I mirror a lot of the comments. I think you guys are all spot on. It's everything that everyone said. I just want to add to it. I also wanted to say that I had to also think outside of myself, take off the council member hat, take off the, any of my preconceived notions or ideas, while still valuing my different perspective, but really like zeroing it down. So this is what I came up with. Family oriented. We still have a lot of schools, and with Camarillo and a lot of other cities within the county, they started closing down their schools. And a lot of the kids in Conejo go to high school in Oxnard because they don't have their school systems there's less kids, there's more, and so we have a good balance. We still have all of our elementary schools and middle schools and stuff open, which I think is great. I would not want us to lose that, because having our youth kind of balances the fact that we have a large number of seniors as well. We're beachy. When you think of Ventura, when I grew up, kids, when they before they got on the bus to go to middle school, a lot of the kids had already been to the beach and surfed and then came back. And by that time, they're wearing their Patagonia jackets and they have their Birkenstock shoes and they had their OPP shorts on. And that was a thing back then. You were cool. And that Ventura still has that feel. The geographical contrasts that we have there's a lot of them, and we have been able to balance and maintain a multiplicity of those geographical contrasts, such as parks, our agricultural lands, our rivers, our beaches, our downtown, and then develop them where they're all each unique, but also add to the character of the city. We have a lot of green spaces weaved in between businesses and homes. And as was mentioned earlier, it's not as planned, and it doesn't have to be, but it works. I think as we are moving forward and getting bigger, I think sometimes I believe we need more planning so that it doesn't become uglier later, because as you get bigger, it gets more complex. And so there does have to be a little bit more thought put behind it. You might laugh at this one. We're kind of country-ish while still being a city. And the reason why I say that is because we're surrounded by ranches and horses. I myself, I lease a horse and I ride, and a friend of mine said, oh yeah, you're from Ventura, all right, through and through. Because of that aspect of kind of, I'm not a city girl, totally 100%. I'm kind of part city and part country. And I think Ventura kind of is that. We have a lively downtown, and the fact that we've made a point to revitalize it, make it valuable, keep it maintained, and it helped identify us nationally. We're on the map with the help of visitors, Visit Ventura, and all the things that we've done to maintain our downtown. You can still walk in our neighborhood. You can still walk the sidewalks, see your neighbors with their dogs, and be on a first name basis. And that's true in my neighborhood. I know all, the Chases, and you know their names, and you see them and you say hello. And I want to say thank you to Stephanie and Casey. I like that Stephanie brought up that difficult conversation, and Casey as well. But I also like that she said authenticity. Ventura feels authentic still. It's not commercially. But I will say, and then this will be my final thought, that I think that when a person of color at times, and I can't speak for all people of color, when you hear small town feel, sometimes it feels like it means that it's better the way it is, even if the way it was not welcoming to somebody like me. So when you talk about redlining and NIMBYism and lack of affordable housing, as was mentioned by Casey, you kind of feel like, are you really saying you don't want me here? Or are you saying you just want it to stay pretty? You want it to stay eclectic. You want it to remain beachy. You want to make sure that our sidewalks are friendly, and so that's where I'll end my comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lori. So let's spend a few minutes, and I'll get to Pete and Nick, who've been patient there waiting. But as you're making your comment, kind of think about that other question of uniqueness. And I think we've been getting there through this conversation as well. And Josh, I know you were wanting to obey the rules of the question 1, question 2. So if you have something on uniqueness, please raise your hand as well. So go ahead, Pete.
I am unmuted. Yeah, just to piggyback on some of the things that other people said about running into people or meeting your neighbors or this and that. I mean, I went to the VLT Ventura Land Trust Film Festival, and I ran into Phil and Casey, and I was able to introduce myself. I'm like, hey, you're here, cool, and I ran into an ex-boss at work, an ex-coworker, and multiple people that I know in the community. That to me is kind of the small town feel. I go downtown, I'm a 10-minute bike ride from downtown. I go down for coffee. I meet the city manager of Ventura. I run into a state appellate court judge. Those are the things that make it, to me, a small town. I can actually contact directly somebody in the city staff or a city council member that, in a big city, you're not really able to do that. If I was in LA, I couldn't call up a city council member and discuss something for half an hour, I don't think. So those to me bring in community and give that small town feel. So for that, and then for uniqueness, I've got, we're not Oxnard, we're not Santa Barbara, we're not 1,000 Oaks, we're not Huntington Beach, Orange County-ish. Bill made a great example of, the two rivers. Like Ojai is Ojai because it's isolated back in the hills. It's by itself. That's Ojai, and it's itself, and it's nothing like Ojai anywhere else. So for uniqueness, those are kind of the things that I say. And one little pushback, sorry, Stephanie, but this little pushback, I think being polished, not polished, sorry, helps us be that small town feel.
There's another term we might have to spend some time dissecting as well, right? What polish means, but go ahead, Nicholas.
Polish, I don't know. This is, first of all, what a great exchange. Just some awesome comments. Lori, your comments were really beautiful about, life in Ventura and what is it we're really trying to preserve. I just deeply appreciate the sentiments that you guys are expressing. I realized some time ago that many of us live and work in Ventura, and that is one of the key ingredients, I think, to it feeling like a quote small town, a place where we recognize each other, and others have said that. I want to caution us not to measure the quality of our lives by how easy it is to find a parking space. I understand that sentiment, but we've created a world where we all kind of need to own a 2,000-pound machine with oily metal, and we have to take it with us everywhere we go. And so we have to make sure that there's a place for us to put that thing when we get there. And I get it. I know this is the world we've created, and it's cars are awesome, but it's also terrifying, and it's not sustainable in the long run. And I think that I just want us to be very conscious of the fact that that's a privilege that is costing the world tremendously on many levels. Just a word of encouragement. I think that we can change in a very deliberate and careful way, kind of surgically identifying the places in our community that we want to see evolve and change, and not disturb the places that we want to take care of and protect. And in the mall, for example, in Johnson Drive, and all those strip centers Pete talked about, those are places that can evolve. And there's a whole lot of stuff in Ventura that doesn't need to change very much, that can stay the way it is. And that's part of this process. So this is a great process, and I think we're going to get there. So thanks.
Thanks, Nick. And just want to be sensitive to time. I know that we do have another item we want to talk through, but take a couple more comments or a couple more questions, comments.
Yeah, Susan, I think actually before, I think see Philip has his hand up. I think this is a great conversation, and we're really finding commonalities and differences, which is really what we wanted. So let's keep this going as long as we need to. And if we go a little later or punt something to the next meeting, that's okay too.
Great. And there's also just recognize that there's been some beautiful sentiment in the chat as well from some of the community members, as well as some of the GPEC members, just reiterating some of those thoughts too. So we appreciate that. So go ahead, Philip.
So are we talking about unique factors now, or?
You can still elaborate on small town character if you'd like, but yeah, we want to try to move into also maybe things that are unique about Ventura that aren't related to the small town character.
Yeah, the unique part is what I was kind of thinking about as well. Just a couple of parts. One is obviously the geography, the two rivers and hills and the ocean. That's kind of unique, but for Southern California, in that sense, we have that kind of constraint. But what else is unique is the role of agriculture in this community. I mean, not just in the city, but this whole county. And specifically related to that is the notion, or not the notion, but the legislation that enacted SOAR, in the sense of we committed ourselves 25 years ago or so and into the future to maintain that. And I think that's a key specific thing that makes us a unique community. I think to the benefit of the community, obviously, but other folks think it's, maybe a constraint. It does have its downsides to that. So I think that's one specific thing. In the role of agriculture, obviously, is important. One thing I think we need to but one concern about is that, we are a beach community, but the beach to me is very underutilized. There's mentions about the parking structure down by the harbor, or on the parking structure, as well as the harbor area, not really being utilized as much as it could be. If you think of other communities in Southern California, Redondo Beach or Los Angeles, Malibu, and beach cities like that, that's a major attraction. It just doesn't seem, maybe because of the access, it's not as accessible as it might be in other places. And then lastly, it's not really unique, because unfortunately it's not unique. In the community I live in, I've been here for a couple of decades. I wish it was more diverse. I mean, I wish we had, in that sense, having more change. I'd like to see it change. The population in my neighborhood is probably 90% Caucasian, and I know my neighbors in you know, I know everybody in my neighborhood, but I wish there was more diversity into it. And part of that is, unfortunately, economics. It's just really kind of expensive to live in certain areas in this town, pretty much any place in this town.
So you'd like to see the unique character and the character be more representative of diversity, diversified as well as
exactly.
To be able to describe that as part of.
Yeah, going to Lori's point, I think that's important to encourage that as much as we can. At least that's kind of my focus on it. I'd like to see that, you know, I don't know how we do that as a policy document, but to open that up as much as we possibly can. That's going to really be on a personal level as well. So, you know, pros and cons.
Thanks, Philip.
Thank you.
Dana.
Yes, so I'm not certain which question I'm speaking to exactly. I part of it is a little bit of commentary on what other people said, you know, agreeing with Stephanie, finding a middle ground somewhere in there. I think the authenticity and unpretentiousness is part of what makes us a small town. And I agree that there are plenty of places that are kind of unpolished on the gritty side. You know, I agree that, you know, not the American strip mall look. The places where we do not have the American strip mall look feel like more like a small town. And we have plenty of American strip mall look places throughout the city. And that's a place where I think a little bit more polish would be really good. The other thing is, it's not, for me, it is, I think that our beaches are underutilized. I think they're under accessible. It's hard to get there. And part of that is the 101, just where it is and how it splits off the beach from a lot of stuff. But, you know, for me, the level of easy to the beach from as a resident is fabulous, although it's just not quite, I don't know if as a tourist who I adore beach towns. Did I freeze or am I unfrozen now? Anyway, the aesthetics of things matter to me in that sense of feeling a beauty and a groundedness. And there are places that we're incredibly beautiful, like your background. And there are places where we are not. And so, like I said, I'm not certain how that fits with the current questions, but those came to mind.
Perfect. Thank you, Dana. Erin.
That came up fast. I was just gathering my thoughts, but I agree with Dana that the aesthetics matter. Creating a place that people want to live and be and stay. And then I also agree that a lot of our things that makes Ventura amazing is, you know, our location, our proximity to the beach, you know, and all these things. But I do agree that it's sub-optimized. Like, we can do better. We can make it more accessible. We can make it feel safer for people to be there. It's kind of embarrassing to me. You know, I have friends from out of town, like surrounding areas, that they don't feel safe when they're on our promenade. Like when they're going onto the pier, you know, it's gritty. I don't know if we need to polish it, but at least make it feel safe and less gritty and more family friendly. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Erin. And Stephanie, I'm going to respond to that polish question, I bet, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, my internet's spotty, so I'm trying to keep my camera off and see if that helps. Yeah, I think that exactly that, Erin, it was my point when I talk about polish. I'm not talking about brand new slick buildings. I'm not talking about modern architecture. I'm talking about cleaning up our Midtown corridor, Thompson Avenue, Main Street, doing something truly meaningful and significant with our homeless population. I think restoring our community's comfort in going out on the pier after the two recent violent attacks out there. I think that those things are really important. And I think that it makes a difference whether you live here or whether you're visiting here. And so to me, those are the things that don't make this feel like a small town. Those kinds of things are not accepted in small towns. Small towns don't allow that behavior. And so I think we need to focus. If we want to be a small town and have that small town feel, then we need to focus on those areas and clean up our community and make sure our streets are clean, make sure we have waste receptacles where people can throw their trash instead of leaving it on the street all up and down Thompson and Main Street. I think those things are really important. I think working with our small businesses and our business owners and some of the empty buildings and saying, we need to clean this up, not replace it, not tear it down and rebuild, but clean it up, and those are the things that I think make such a difference when you're driving through. It's old is great, but unclean and unsafe feeling is not great. And those are the things when I talk about polish that I'm talking about. Someone I think put in the chat grittiness, and I think, or grubbiness. I think those are things that, we don't want in a small town, and I don't want in the town that I live in. And I think that we can certainly make some inroads in that area.
Thank you. And I think grittiness and for some people conjures up different kinds of images, but maybe the word grubbiness is more what you were getting at, right? Thank you. So Lori, Sabrina, and then Pete. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks. I was thinking grunge when she said grit. You said the other word. I was thinking maybe grunge, that fits better. I also thought of that we have a large baby boomer, what a lot of people refer to as hippie community right here in the city of Ventura. And I think that is a definite, even when I was campaigning, that was like a target group because we are environmentalists. We love our trees. We love our environment. We love our parks. We love our land. We love the dirt. I was a tomboy growing up myself, but anyway, that's beside the point. The preservation of some buildings, I think, is what helps us continue to feel like our community is unique. Because, like, if you're a child and you drive down the same street and go by the same building all the time, and when you become an adult and you go back home after you visited or went to college and you see those same buildings, you're like, I'm home, those type of things. Because I remember we used to travel out of town every summer to go camping. When we come back on the freeway, we'd always see the wagon wheel, the big, huge wheel, and we knew we were back home. You take a big, deep breath. So that sort of thing. And then the last thing I'm going to say is I've always leaned into master plans, neighborhood specific plans with design standards. And that might sound a lot, but the reason why I'm saying that is if you have that's established, that establishes development requirements for developers so that we can maintain the feel that we choose. Because in those specific plans, we would be saying, we want to make sure you have this much of a setback. We want to make sure you have planters, or we want to make sure you have many faux balconies. We want to make sure that you have, if you have a business that use channel letters, we don't want you to use a box, or we don't want you to use it. It clarifies this is, and if you have neighborhood specific plans, what that means is what's right for Thompson and Front Street is not the same as what's right for downtown, which is not the same as what's right for Ventura College area, which is not the same as what's right on Johnson Drive. Mm-hmm. And so it takes the city and takes its hot spots and puts circles around them, creates a district and says these areas specifically get names. They get named. And this is like a dream of mine. And then those specific plans are created so that when a developer comes in and they build, all they have to do is open up that little book and say, we make sure we hit all that stuff. And then when it's built, the neighbors are looking at it like, wow, that's beautiful. That's great. That is indicative of what I would expect for the city of Ventura. And that's it for now.
Thanks, Lori. So we'll go Sabrina and then Pete, and then we'll transition over to our next topic, which kind of keeps the same, a little bit of the same conversation going about areas for transition and change. So go ahead, Sabrina.
Sure. I just kind of wanted to go back a little bit to the beach conversation. And I would add that I think part of what we have not done as a community is really invest in our open spaces and make them more not only attractive, but also activate them. I mean, if you drive by Plaza Park on any given day, there's hardly anyone there. It's centrally located. It's a great green space, but there's nothing to do there. Same thing for the park across the street from the Mission. And those places are just underutilized because we haven't invested to create that, you know, an attractive infrastructure there. And similarly at the beach, you know, if you look at our neighbors to the north, on their prime beach real estate, they've got volleyball courts, they've got things to do with your family, and it just brings people there. I'm not a big fan of necessarily increasing density at our beaches, because I think, you know, that comes with disadvantages as well, right? But if what we want to do is reinforce the outdoor lifestyle and the sort of active culture that we have in this community, that means investing in our green space.
Thanks, Sabrina. And Pete, we'll let you round out this discussion.
Yeah, I just want to address Stephanie's comments. And Stephanie, don't worry, I think we're on the same side, actually. When I hear polished, I'm thinking like Beverly Hills polished, okay? Not what we are in Ventura. So when you talk homeless, when you talk cleanliness and cleaning up the city, I'm totally on board with that. I think those are great points. I think we actually we're more in common than we're apart, and I think that covers it. Plus, Stephanie, go Dodgers!
Thanks, Pete. Excellent conversation. Thank you all for all the great comments and thoughtful comments as well. And Matt, you want to take the reins?
Thank you. Just thank you to everyone. That was an amazing conversation. Really, just so much, so many great ideas, and so much to unpack. With that, I'm glad we're recording this so we can kind of keep it up. Just a couple of things. I think there is a lot of commonality, and I think there clearly are going to be some places where there are differences. Casey, you really kind of highlighted the crux of what we're trying to do overall with this project, which is how do you take all of these great characteristics in the community and preserve them while also addressing the needs in the community and recognizing, because I think everybody does, that communities evolve over time. And how do you evolve in a way that maintains those great things that you have and actually makes some things even better without losing what you cherish? And I think that's really what we're trying to do with this project and with this conversation. And so I think this is all really helpful. As the transition to our next phase, and we are running a little bit behind, but let's not worry about the time right now, because that was such a great conversation. The next part is actually thinking about where there's new development and what does it look like and where is it? And so that is part of this conversation about change, because we know that their development happens, properties turn over. It doesn't necessarily mean something totally different. And so I think let's keep an open mind when we're doing this. And Nicholas said this, which is, it's not about changing the whole community. It's about finding those locations where you need to change to address the issues. And so Simran is going to run through really quickly, high level, some of the survey results. And then we're going to have a conversation about what you saw in the survey, what your observations were. And I think the conversation we had teased it up. And then what are the areas we want to focus on when we have that conversation about where new development happens and where potential growth happens. Simran, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all again today. I'm Simran Malhotra with Jimmy Associates. I'm going to walk you through some of the survey results that we received as a part of the visioning survey. We talked about the first part and what we heard about the core strategies and values for the city, and this was such a great conversation. The second part is focused on where should different types of uses go and what the best locations for those are. So the detailed results were a part of the survey report you already have, so I'm going to provide a really quick overview. I'll also point out that this portion of the survey is just one piece of the public input that we have received that will inform the land use alternatives that will develop over the next several months. So the survey asked questions about which areas in the city are appropriate for various types of residential uses, mixed use, office, industrial or other employment uses, as well as areas for retail and services. It also asked specific questions about focused infill in specific areas. For example, we asked if housing was appropriate in some of the industrial areas. We also had other questions about parks, open space, and trails. So the following series of slides show the mapped responses to the questions we asked, and these are heat maps. As Matt described, these maps show in the darker red color where we had the most points of interest dropped on there. They weren't location or parcel specific, but they were in the general vicinity. And then as the color changes to yellow and green, the proportion of responses decreases. So this first map shows the areas within the city which were considered appropriate for townhomes or small lot single family. You know, these are across the city, the west side adjacent to downtown, some of the Soar Islands, and the mall sites were those of with the most interest. This map shows the location for multifamily housing, and these were areas which were much more focused. Again, downtown, west side, Main and Thompson corridor, 5 Point area, the mall, and Montalvo, and the Johnson corridor. Similarly, for mixed use, we had the same areas that lit up again with the addition of Pierpont, Telegraph, and Victoria corridors. For employment type uses, and starting with office uses, these areas are as one might expect. For office buildings, the areas are near the mall and in downtown, some in Arundel and North Bank, and then also close to the County Civic Center on Victoria. For industrial uses, West Side, Arundel, and North Bank, these are areas where there are existing industrial uses already. And there's a little bit in Saticoy as well. With regard to areas where retail and services were desired, there were these 6 areas which are highlighted on the map that jumped out, and there were suggestions for what those type of uses should be. Grocery stores or supermarkets featured highly on those lists, as well as boutique retail, mixed use restaurants, farmers market, and neighborhood serving retail as well. We also asked a question about infill in existing single-family neighborhoods and whether the city should allow for up to 4-unit buildings on a parcel if the building maintains the character of the single-family neighborhood, which means that it is in a house form. So the building would look like a house, but you could have up to 4 units. And then we asked folks to draw a boundary if they thought that was appropriate. The responses are quite interesting. About 18% of the respondents said that yes, we should allow this in all the single-family areas around the city. But about 39% said yes, but were more nuanced in what those locations are, and those would be those within walking distance to goods and services. And about 43% said no, this should not be allowed in any of the single-family neighborhoods. The boundaries that respondents drew were citywide, but others indicated specific locations in Saticoy, near Ventura College, downtown, and then the Pierpont area. I'll also note that while the survey was out, Governor Newsom signed SB 9, which requires city to allow essentially 4 units to a lot by either splitting a lot and building a duplex on each half. So that's something we'll continue to consider as we develop our alternatives and the rest of the general plan. The survey also asked respondents to identify whether the areas that are currently industrial should stay industrial or if housing should be introduced in them. And as you can see across the table on the left, for all 5 areas at varying degrees, the respondents said some housing should be allowed. Except for North Bank and Arundel, which had over 25%, which said keep these as industrial. For the rest of the areas, housing was considered as appropriate, either in the short term, but having housing across housing develop in this area over time, in these areas over time. We also asked a question about possible annexation of county islands and or the SOAR areas. And surprisingly, the 3 of the 5 areas, or 3 of the 6 areas, or 4 of the 6 areas, I should say, received the majority response was yes, we should consider these areas for possible annexation over time. This will be kept in mind as we move forward. There were 2 areas that were very clearly a no. One was the area on the south to the SOAR area, the agricultural area here, and then the second being up here on the northeastern part of the city. We asked what the long-term vision was for a couple of key locations in the city, the city-owned Olivas Golf Course and the county fairgrounds. The responses were mixed and ranged from either no change to minor expansion to completely transforming both areas. So we received a whole range of responses here, and we'll continue to explore these as we develop alternatives for these areas. So that was a very quick overview of what we heard, and as I mentioned, you all have had a chance to look at the survey report with the more nuanced comments in there, and especially the appendix, which had several dozens of pages of individual responses. But this slide shows some of the key findings and insights that we have pulled out so far. The first being the location for new development, especially multifamily and mixed-use development, were as expected. And this was similar to what we heard at the GPAC meeting, and also at the pop-ups, and what we have heard from the community councils. And those areas are the downtown, Pacific View Mall, the Thompson, Main, Victoria, and Johnson Drive corridors, 5 Points, and West Side Industrial. We also heard pretty loud and clear that there were more retail and services needed in several locations, such as East Side, West Side, Montalvo, and the Main Street corridor. And then while we heard that the industrial areas are possible locations for housing, these were also identified as areas where jobs should continue to grow. So there's a little bit of a disconnect or overlap, and we'll need to consider that as we move forward. As I noted earlier, majority suggested that infill residential should be considered in some or all single-family neighborhoods, and there was mixed feedback on the future of the city-owned Olivas Golf Course and the county fairgrounds. And then finally, the annexation and development of 3 of the 5 county pockets or SOAR land areas should be considered. And residential uses were by far the most common land use suggested for those areas. So based on, so what do we do with all this feedback? So the survey results will inform the development of the land use alternatives. And this slide outlines that process that we have already started and are in the midst of. We started with the initial identification of areas of change and stability at the July GPAC meeting. That informed the questions we asked in the visioning survey. The results of that survey have informed the development of a map I'll share shortly on the next slide, which are the preliminary areas for discussion. We'll get your input tonight, and then we'll refine those areas in upcoming meetings, and then develop land use alternatives for those areas. Oops, excuse me, I went by too fast. So based on the feedback we've received so far, this map shows the areas that will be looked at more closely during the alternative phase. And there's quite a few things going on this map, so let me just walk you through those. So the areas in pink are those where we have a clear direction that we should consider change. And these areas are, let me turn on my pointer again, downtown, the Main and Johnson corridors, 5 Points, the mall area, and the Montalvo-Johnson corridor. The areas in blue, and these were those that have a medium level of interest or next in the hierarchy, so to speak, include the West Side industrial areas, the Victoria corridor, Pierpont, certain neighborhood center locations within the neighborhoods, the Wells corridors. 2 SOAR areas are also included in this, the one in this location, and then the second one, which is right off of Saticoy. The areas in yellow are where the direction was less clear, but enough interest was indicated that we should develop alternatives for these. And these include the industrial areas, North Bank and Arundel, part of the SOAR area in this location, the fairgrounds, as well as the golf course. The areas which are shown in the red dashed outlines, so as you can see this here, these county islands, and then Saticoy and some other smaller islands are identified as areas for annexation. The general plan is long-term, so any potential annexation is something that can be considered within that context. It's not something that is anticipated to happen in the short term. And then finally, what's not shown here are the single-family areas. We'll continue to have conversations about how infill may occur in those neighborhoods. And with that, I will open it up for any questions, and then we can have a short discussion about the map as well.
Thanks, Simran. So we wanted to kind of have 2 parts of this conversation, and one, thinking more broadly on the survey, just on the results that were shared or that you reviewed. Were you surprised by anything? Was there anything that made you go scratch your head, or we want to dig in a little bit more, or just kind of observations from the survey? And then we want to have a discussion around that areas of discussion map that Simran just mentioned or just shared. So maybe we start with the survey. If anyone has any observations or comments. Spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about that, and then another 10 or so with the map. I don't think we have maybe about that much time. All right, so we'll start with Nick.
So just to confirm that the survey responses apparently are primarily from older homeowner Ventura citizens. Is that correct?
That's correct, based on the percentages that that Matt shared in the beginning.
Okay, that does make this a little, I mean, I don't disagree, and I'm older and I own a house. I don't disagree with a lot of the results of the survey, but I am a little bit concerned that it's not fully representative of, you know, the input we've got. And I know we have to work with what we got, but I wish there was a way to get younger, non-homeowner, you know, that sort of thing. So
yeah, Nick, just I want to quickly respond to that, which is that this is one piece of information, and we're going to be sharing with you the results of the pop-ups, which I think are going to have a greater diversity. And we realized that that might be the case and so we went out to, Ventura Coast Brewing Company, and we went to the West Side. We went to places where, maybe people don't, who aren't typically involved might go. So we tried to do that. And so we'll see if the results are similar or different. We'll feed those to you between the meetings.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
So Casey, Bill, and then Sabrina.
Yeah, so my question is like an actual question. On the thing that really struck me about the survey results is when we're talking about where people think housing development is a good idea, there are these islands of SOAR lands. They are on page 49 of the survey results. They're marked as D, if that's helpful. But basically, they're like these undeveloped agricultural lands that are kind of within city development. And I'm wondering what the story is with those, why maybe someone has a really good reason why they're SOAR lands, or if they're just legacy agricultural areas. Does anyone know? Because I thought it was interesting that that was such a concentrated area pinpointed for housing.
I actually want to, maybe we can have one of the GPAC members just quickly answer that question, who knows the history, maybe in 1 minute. And Casey, I agree. I actually thought that was really interesting with the results of how many, there was a heat map on some of those lands. And so, and this is the map here, Simran, put it in.
Yeah, thanks, Simran. That's really helpful. That red space, like right in the middle there.
Yeah. And I that was interesting. Is there someone on the GPAC who wants to just speak up and give a 30-second history?
And if so, just go ahead and start talking, since we have so many hands raised, we couldn't tell which one, if you are raising your hand for that purpose.
I can tell you that my understanding is it's been part of the Ventura City SOAR for a couple of decades. I was surprised to see those hot spots there. I think that part of the issue is that there's a bit of a conflict with the agriculture and the surrounding residential, and that's a problem we've created. If it is going to change, there is a tremendous opportunity to look at it in terms of how we would create a neighborhood for, this century, not last century. So that's interesting. That's what I got.
We can see if we can dig in.
Sorry, I don't know. I don't have, I'm not sure, but this is what I've heard is that, we have city SOAR, which most of the cities in the county don't have. And also those areas, or the way the other cities were like a boundary around the city and not have SOAR within the city, that boundary. And Ventura did it differently and included those islands within the city. So that's the best of mine. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but that's the best of mine.
Maybe what we can do is digging and come back with a little bit of the history and the regulations around it, because we know that there are regulations in place.
If I may add,
Matt, if I can.
Oh, Lori, why don't you go ahead?
I was just going to say that the heat map where it's on the east side in the red, that's not, I don't believe that's SOAR, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, this area is SOAR. We just checked that today because we had the same question when we were confirming that. So it is SOAR. These areas were all agricultural lands at the time the SOAR designation was adopted. Since then, some of them have fallen out of use, and I think that might be partly why some rose to the top and in terms of being considered for other uses, while other areas, like the one down here, really didn't. But we'll dig some more.
Yeah, we can dig in some more on that one. So we have several hands raised here, so we'll move on to hearing from some more folks. So I'll go Bill and then Sabrina.
I think a little bit of the issue there is the survey itself. I mean, looking through social media, I know that there were a lot of people that were upset. It felt like the survey was asking them to plan more housing, which they weren't necessarily in favor of. Not understanding the goal of the survey in terms of RENA and everything like that. I think that was a little confusing for it. And at the same time, when you start telling people to plan housing, you know, it's not a simple thing to do. And so you look at these open ag spaces and you're like, oh, you can put housing right here. So I think it kind of just, it's an easier thing to envision than actually infill assemblages and what's actually required for that. But I was going to say so I think one of my concerns was with the survey for a lot of people that some of the comments I saw on social media is they felt like it was a pro housing survey because they felt like that's the only thing that they were being asked to do is to plot housing, not understanding the larger goal, I think, necessarily in terms of the housing element and RENA and everything like that. So I think that would be kind of a weakness in the survey. And then looking at like this heat map that you have here, you know, for single family townhomes and everything like that, I don't know, looking at the west side, that necessarily reflects the opinions of those people living in the west. I'm an east sider, but on the west side, I mean, everything I hear about that, you know, coming from the west side is not that they want to see more development. They want to retain what, you know, they feel makes them special on it. I don't think they're looking for more development necessarily to do that. And I think that's just, you know, and then looking at this larger map that just popped up here, you know, the concept of I guess when you're saying multifamily, are you talking about SB 9 in terms of, you know, turning that into duplexes and quadruplexes from there? Because the assemblages would just
multifamily was 5 units plus.
Yeah, I don't know if people understand that assignment, to be honest with you. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I just.
Good point.
Thanks, Bill. And just to reiterate what Matt had said, that the survey is one data point. So it's not the general plans being planned around this survey, those survey results, but it's just one data point that gets mixed in with the workshops and the other activities. So just to note that, but your comments are really important to kind of how to interpret the survey. So go ahead, Sabrina.
Yeah, actually, if you pull that map back up, I had a question about sort of why we included the fairgrounds, which is state owned, and we included Olivas Park, the city golf course, but we didn't include the Buenaventura City Golf Course, and we didn't include the Satakoy Golf Course. So to me, that was a little confusing because I felt like people didn't necessarily understand who owns what the restrictions are on those things. And you know, whether or not everything was fair game. I mean, you know, if you ask people, where should we put housing? An empty space seems like a good place to put it. But then if you ask people, do you want to lose our agricultural spaces within the city of Ventura? That seemed like the overwhelming majority of people said, no, we don't want to annex places through from SOAR. And for me, what stood out was, you know, when we talked about, and I apologize, I don't remember who said it, but someone talked about you know, being surrounded by two rivers and how that defines part of the character of the city of Ventura. I think what also partially defines us is the fact that we don't just blend into our neighbors, right? So if you were to lose that agricultural buffer along Olivas Park, or if you were to lose some of the agricultural buffers that exist on the other side of the river that belong to Oxnard, pretty soon we're just one big run-on suburban area. And I think that, to me, that goes a long way to removing that small town feel.
Thanks, Sabrina. Louise and then Philip.
I'm curious, is there a heat map of where the respondents are from? Because I think that when I see these the results of this survey, and I'm just going to say it, although it might be a little bit harsh, I feel NIMBYism. A lot of the feedback that we've gotten here in the GPAC meetings from GPAC members and from the public has been that, on the east side, there's a lack of places to go, a lack of walkable neighborhoods and grocery stores and a neighborhood feel. Well, to get that, there has to be some change. But yet when we look at this map, all the change seems to be shoved over to the west side and downtown. And it just doesn't seem to, whether it's a fault in understanding the survey or an example of, I think somebody in the chat said, leave my neighborhood alone. But I think it'd be very interesting to have more data points on where did the survey respondents live when they filled
What
this
you're looking
out.
at on the screen right now, Louise, is the heat map of where people came from. So this is the geographies on the right on the map, and then the more of the demographics on the left there. So there were some more from the west side, but maybe, but to your point, maybe digging in a little bit more on correlating some of the different responses to geography as well.
Well, and if the public comment that we've heard, and if the input from GPAC members who do represent more the east side is a vision that we want to pursue in the general plan, then there has to be a recognition that there's going to have to be some changes over there.
Right. Thanks, Louise. Philip and then Steph.
Yeah, so two things. One is I went through a lot of those comments. I didn't read every one of them, but there was quite a few. And what struck me was that so many of them were contradictory to each other. We have not enough housing, we need more housing. No more housing, we have too much housing. So I don't know how, who or how that stuff gets reconciled or prioritized. It just seems like an exercise in futility to kind of take those comments and say, there's some kind of consensus, at least on some of those topics about housing and so forth, whether we go up or out, it seems like they're backwards. That's just my comment. But the second question is more technical about the fairgrounds. As was mentioned, that's state property. And so I'm not sure that we have any sense of having input on what happens there. I mean, the state owns it, the state board. Does anybody have any sense of how that can be impacted by this process? I'm just not sure that that's even relevant to us even discussing it.
Philip,
it's not ours.
Let me see if I can answer that question. There are lots of examples of fairgrounds that have evolved to not just be what it is right now. So it doesn't mean that the fairgrounds are going to go away and it's all going to be housing. But the fairgrounds are looking for new sources of revenue, new things that they can do. Some are looking for that. And we need to talk to the fairgrounds here and the fairgrounds board. But the general plan can certainly identify a desire and a direction. As with any parcel that is owned by someone that is not the city, the individual landowner is going to have to make the decision about what they do with that property. In this case, it's the fair board, right? So, we don't ask the homeowner specifically, every homeowner in the city, exactly what they want to do with their property. And if they say nothing, then we just leave it off the map. We are the city developing a vision for the future.
Thank you, Matt. That's good.
Thanks, Matt.
And
Steph,
we
then
can give
Lori.
examples actually of fairground master plans that have been done throughout the state. It's interesting.
Steph, and then Lori.
Yeah, so I have a comment about the survey and then a question. So the survey, I definitely think we should take it with a grain of salt and like kind of as far as data points go, like, I mean, definitely very old, very white, like 12% were Hispanic, whereas our community is like 36 or 37% Hispanic. So like, and then also like 770 respondents out of over 110,000 doesn't seem very representative at all either. So yeah, I don't know, maybe. So that goes into my question though, which is I'm actually curious how this map was created. Was this area of discussion map based on solely the survey, or is it a function of multiple past GPAC events? And like what, yeah, how is this map, what data points did it go off of?
Steph, I'll jump in and just two things. So, one is, it's a survey. It is not statistically valid. We never claimed that it was going to be. Philip, there's contradictions. Some people want housing, some people don't want housing, some people want change, some people don't want change. It's exactly the conversations we've been hearing throughout the process from day one here. So, to actually get that in the survey, that's actually pretty accurate from what we've heard so far. In terms of where this map came from a variety of sources. We had a conversation in July and we asked you where you thought change would happen, where new uses would go in the city. So it came from that. We had the same conversations with each of the community councils, a little bit different, but we asked that question there. We had pop-up workshops where there were stickers and people put stickers on the map. It came from there. It came from the existing general plan, where actually the pattern is relatively similar in a lot of areas from the existing general plan. So it's not that much different. And then it came from this survey and the results. And it sort of follows the heat map in the survey, which actually I thought followed a lot of the comments that this group had: the mall, the downtown, the corridors, think about the industrial areas. So it was interesting, and I'll just say this out, no, this survey is not perfect. We know that. But, I actually felt that there were a lot of parallels from what this group had talked about to what we found in some of the results of the survey. No consensus, but we didn't expect consensus overall. So anyway, I'm gonna just leave that one there.
Thanks, Matt.
For conversation.
The map itself isn't in any way surprising. I just wanted to make sure that it was based off of like a lot more than just the survey.
So we have 4 more hands up.
And let me just
be
clear. This map is a stab. It's a first start that we want comments on, and it'll be refined. So just to be clear on that.
So we have about 10 more minutes until we get to public comment. So just to note that for the folks that have their hands up, you could just have your comments be pretty brief. So thanks. Go ahead, Lori, and then David.
Thanks. I just want to first start out by saying that change has always happened from the moment I was a child growing up here. I was born here until now. So I think we need to adjust our thinking and our perspectives when we're talking about what's going to happen in the next 20 years. There will be change in the next 20 years as much as there's been change in the last 20 years. To say we don't want change, or for some people to say we don't want change, is actually the opposite of what we are having a general plan committee in the first place for. The whole point is for us to plan for change, or that proposed change, or the projected change. So I just want to start out by saying that. I also wanted to say that where I live in my neighborhood in the Bird Track, when it was built, across the street was an orchard when I was a kid. That orchard turned into Woodbridge. And then after they built Woodbridge, they built Todd Ranch. Community Park wasn't there when I was a child. Community Park got built years later. Stonehenge was built. That's a part of my district as well. Citrus is another part right next to Stonehenge. All those properties are not single family homes. And I think I think it's important for us to continue to remember that Ventura has always been on the cutting edge when it comes to housing. This is not the first time that we've done something like this. The point is to do it in a way that fits within the feel or the character of the neighborhood. So in Woodbridge, which is, they're like condos or apartment, they're not quite apartments that were built across the street. They fit within right next to a single family neighborhood tract development. The Todd Ranch is a step up. It was more like apartments, but it was done beautifully and it fit. Stonehenge, those are more like they're built closer together. The Citrus are like brownstones almost, very close together, less backyard, but they're still homes nonetheless. And so I think what is being proposed and what the focus should naturally be is on infill development opportunities. And one of the things that came out when I saw the presentation, and I had these conversations with Matt and Peter, is that SOAR is the one who led the charge on let's close out, let's save our open and agricultural resources and focus on infill development. That was SOAR that said that. And so now that we are at the point where we need to focus on strategic infill development, the conversation can't become, well, all of a sudden, we don't want the infill development. Because that was the argument for SOAR to be voted on in the first place, is that we don't want to build out, we want to build in. And so my concern about the survey, one of the concerns was that the questions didn't specifically specify the fact that we want to focus on infill development. And in addition, if you're a respondent, if you live on the east side, we want you to give us ideas about where you think infill development could work within a 20-mile radius, or not 20, that's too far, 5-mile radius of where you live. Not, I live in the Keys and I think that everything should be built over on Johnson corridor. That is not helpful.
Lori, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to make sure we get to public comment before we get too late. So I just want to recognize a couple more hands raised and then.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. So I just wanted to say, I do appreciate all the work on the surveys. We have over 80 respondents that were homeowners, and I would like, and we did discuss this and we said we're going to try, is to have a focus on trying to reach out to renters in future surveys on different plan drivers instead of just homeowners.
Definitely.
So, thank you.
So David, and then Kyler, I know you had your hand up before and it's back up again. So I'm going to go David, then Kyler.
Thank you. I want to go back to the slide that spoke about the city golf course in the fairgrounds. More than 70% of the people surveyed, and these are older white homeowners, which you would think would be more in favor of golf courses. Over 70% of them said something additionally should be done with that property. The typical golf course is 150 acres in space. And I love open spaces. And this is adjacent to the river, which is very important. But it's a monoculture. It's grass that has to be fed, watered. And the typical golf course, I heard on NPR within the past month, takes 1 million gallons a night to keep green. Now, I don't know if they're doing a links type of project there. I haven't played that course in many, many years. But it's clear to me that the people surveyed, at least, and I suspect that in general would say that golf course might be antiquated. Can we do something in addition to just mowing lawns and letting that be used by several hundred people a day? I don't know. To the point about fairgrounds, and Matt, thank you for mentioning that. Fairgrounds are owned by the state, but that doesn't mean you can't make partnerships with them or suggest a better, God forbid, a better location for it that has appropriate parking, that doesn't interfere with downtown commerce and residents. Might be a bigger use. The city's talking about potentially annexing in the future parts east of the city. That's a parcel that is underutilized. It is a gem, one of the prettiest spots in the world. And we can think outside the box here. We're creative enough and we can do that. Those are my comments.
Thanks, David. Kyler and then Pete.
Great. I have two comments and I'll try and be as quick as possible. One is just in Ventura, with this conversation going around the gas compressor, and there was a lot of discussion around industrial uses or converting industrial uses into housing. And I've just have even personally been kind of rethinking whether or not that's a good idea. And I saw West Side Industrial especially being highlighted as an area of high interest. And I guess I'm thinking through how over the next 20 years we might move industrial uses into residential uses. And I think we're learning a lot of lessons even this year about how that residential encroachment on industrial uses sometimes gets unevenly applied, especially to marginalized groups. And so I'm a little hesitant by the amount of times housing in industrial areas has come up. And two is that map, the draft map of areas of discussion doesn't seem to touch on single family zoning. And yet it looks like from the state with SB 9, we're gonna have to be planning for how single family zoning, what uses and what types of development are allowed in single family areas. And so I don't know if that will be touched on later, but I think as a general plan, as we update for the next 25 years, we're gonna need to figure out how to infill in single family areas. And that's not an area specifically targeted on this areas of discussion map. And that's it.
If I can quickly respond to that, Kyler, yes, you're absolutely right. The single family areas will be a part of what the general plan addresses. We didn't show those on the map, but just for visual reasons, but I did make a comment about that during my presentation. But the single family areas, SB 9, as well as SB 478, as a whole host of other laws, will require us to rethink how single family neighborhoods allow development in the future, and those will be conversations we'll continue to have.
Yeah, and just a note too that, I mean, we did shorten this conversation more than we had intended, but also with the understanding that this conversation around the map and the discussion around areas of change is far from over. So we're getting closer to the vision and the vision statement, but certainly not in terms of this areas of discussion map. So just know that this is not the last time you'll see this. Probably see it many more times. I don't know, Matt, you'll probably talk about that at the next steps, but just to let you know, you don't have to feel like, oh no, I had to weigh on it tonight and we didn't have enough time. And so just note that it will be coming back to you. Let's go Pete and Nick, and then I'll let Matt talk about next steps before we open it up for public comment. So if you do want to speak as a member of the public, you can go ahead and put do your hand raised now if you'd like, so we know how many we have. But go ahead, Pete, and then Nick.
Okay.
Keep it brief if you can.
Well, I'll see what I can do. I've been waiting a while, but we'll do what I can. Okay, so surprises. I was surprised at the on page 49 that there was a majority for annexing the D SOAR properties, but I've been pushing for that. I mean, I've been an advocate for that since day one on this process, and I've been allowed a lot of pushback, but that was actually a surprise that they're in favor of that. But then also I was kind of surprised that the E properties, the E locations weren't on that, which to me is basically the same as some of the D properties. Trails, which hasn't been mentioned, and a lot of the trails that were mapped out on the survey were on the east end. I would like to point out that we have a trail on the west end that is very popular. It's kind of an ad hoc trail that people have just done and created. It's from the corner of Cedar and Kellogg, and it goes down to basically the De Anza Middle School property. So if we could, I don't know if we want to add that or what we'd like to do. I have a concern over mixed use. I like mixed use, but I'm wondering what the brick and mortar future is for retail. Let's see. Also pay, I did notice, and I know this was brought up about the west side, and I think Luis brought this up too, about most of the density was brought up for the west side and downtown and midtown, but basically east of the college was not considered great for density. And again, I would have to again agree with Luis on looking at the respondents to the survey. And I know, Matt, you've said it's not a scientific survey, so just want to point it out. Also, something to go back on the housing element, this group brought up about the mall and Johnson Drive area. We did point out that we would maybe like to see housing there, and that's a possibility for housing there. But then when I saw the housing element, I was really surprised that all the affordable housing numbers were put in those two locations. I'm guessing that was because maybe that was to make it meet the state regs, but I don't think that was the intent of this body. Another thing was that there was on the map, it showed about putting housing in the industrial area down, I guess we're calling the Arundel area, but which is south of Main Street, kind of west, south of the Target and all that area. I'm wondering how that correlates with the environmental issues that we brought up about mainly like the west side with putting housing with industrial areas and possible contamination and hazardous waste. And water. Saw a lot of the comments and the 300 plus comments are about how we can't have development because of water and maybe desal, and Lori and Doug, this may go to you because Peter and Nate have dropped off. We have the water pure, we have the state interconnection. So I'm wondering if people are saying that we don't have potential water supplies or current water supplies, that the water department needs to reach out to the residents and say, hey, this is what we're doing. I know there's a video on the website, but maybe that needs to be pushed a little bit more. And last thing was just a clarification on infill and SOAR, as Lori brought up. Infill, I agree with infill, but I think in one of the past meetings, it was identified that we only have 5% of the infill in the city. So to me, the SOAR properties, like I said, which I've been promoting, or the SOAR lands that are islanded within the city, those to me are infill. So I don't know how others think on that, but to me, though, is when we talk about infill, that those are to me, that's included. And I think that's
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Thanks for being patient. Nick. I'm not seeing any hands up yet from the public, but just a reminder, if you did want to speak in the public comment period, go ahead and raise your hand now so we make sure we save enough time for you.
And I'll try to be very brief. One thought on the housing in the industrial areas. I think it's important that people realize that there are already people living in those areas. Many of them illegally. And I'd like to suggest that, we've had these very defined, contained land use definitions for several decades that have required us to live separately from where we work. And that the kind of housing that might be accommodated in some of those industrial areas could include the idea of live work on limited basis. And that could include craftsmen with, cabinetry shops or other kinds of trade shops that wouldn't necessarily be comfortable in a denser, primarily residential area. But the industrial area, the spectrum of uses there could be expanded to include support for some of that unique use that we really haven't legally supported, but is happening even now. So I wanted to point that out. One other, just a small thing, and I'm glad to hear we've got more opportunity to look at these maps, but the government center is a tremendously suburban development surrounded by acres of parking. And I would love to have the city engage the county about the idea of some of that possibly floating above the parking lots, being affordable housing, possibly for county workers or for, just in general. If that would be a great place to do some infill housing and create a little bit of a real, community center at the government center. It's just one of my little brainstorm ideas. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll move right into public comment if that's okay, Matt, before we do next steps.
Yeah, let's do public comment and then we'll close with next steps.
Okay, great. So Carl, I see, looks like you are our sole member of the public that's asking to speak tonight. So I will turn the floor over to you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be real quick. First of all, GPAC members, I've sent you 2 extensive letters. I hope you've received them. I had a chance to review them. Phil, to your comment, this is the same kind of thing we were wrestling with 20 years ago. I've got a box full of same comments. I think Dave Common's seen it. I'd be happy to share it with any of you. Nothing goes away. It stays the same. However, Lori made a good comment. Don't live in the moment. Remember, this is focusing on the future. So what you're living in right now and your neighbors are experiencing, this isn't about planning specifically for them. Real quickly, I sit on the downtown parking advisory committee. Parking issues, the city council is going to be wrestling with Main Street very soon about should we eliminate the parking. So you think you got parking problems now, you're going to need another parking garage. The parking garage, by the way, at the beach, the couple of floors are going to have to be closed off because they're having some physical problems with the building. So it's going to be even harder to get to the beach. Nick, to your comment on the government center, we actually discussed that in the Victoria Corridor Plan several years ago about housing potentially, because there's a lot of wasted space around the government center. Wouldn't it be good to have people working at the government center living closer to there? And then finally, don't fixate on the promenade. 2 things. Keep in mind that the sea level is probably going to rise, and capping the freeway should be very much on top of all of this because we've been disconnected and there's a chance to develop there in a fashion that would really make us a very unique community that'd be easy to get to for tourists, but also a lot of opportunities for building housing around that. There's been a couple of good plans and that needs to continue to stay somewhere in the general plan. And don't forget the downtown is in the Coastal Act, and as is a lot of the coastal zone, and those are all affected by the Coastal Act. And it's not so easy to change as you'd like it to be. And that's my real quick comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Dawn, go ahead, and you have 2 minutes.
Just very quickly, I put this comment in the chat, but just a reminder to everybody that change is the only constant in life. Any living organism is constantly changing, and a city is a living, breathing organism. We're either going to evolve and reinvent ourselves and adapt to the changing world around us, or we're going to begin to atrophy and decay and decline, quite frankly. And so while I know it's really tempting to want to hold on to the past and, for all it's worth and try to live that past into the future, it's not reality. And so I really appreciate the good work that this committee and the city is doing to plan for the future that we all want to be raving about or want our grandchildren to be raving about, 30, 40 years from now. So it's very important to get out of our comfort zone, quite frankly, and maybe embrace ideas and concepts that aren't traditionally what Ventura has been, but are consistent with where we want to be in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dawn. So I think we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. And Matt, if you want to just make some notes on next steps, and then Lori can close out the meeting officially.
Yeah, so next steps, we need to continue talking about the survey results and the map and give you more feedback from the pop-up workshops. We are moving into, as we mentioned, we're moving into writing a vision statement, but also creating and thinking about these areas of discussion and then moving into alternatives. To be honest, there is so much to unpack from this meeting that I thought we had a direction of like what we're doing at the next meeting, but I think we need to rethink a little bit and figure out how we can really continue some of the conversations that we're having this evening. So we will get back to you in the next week or so about the next meeting and what we're doing at the next meeting, as well as additional information. But I think that we will need to have a continued conversation about the map that we showed, the survey results, and really dig deeper into that before we move forward. So, apologies. I wish I could lay out a plan for the next 6 months of what we're doing at each thing, but this meeting, again, the comments and thoughts were great, and it's going to cause us to pause for a week and then come back to you with where we are going to go in the next steps.
Great, thank you so much. And I think then, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're at 8:30, so just to be cognizant of time.
Yeah, I think we just need Lori to officially close out the meeting, and I think we've lost a few members of the GPAC, so just kind of maybe make a short little closing, but officially, Lori, if you want to just officially close the meeting for the evening.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you everyone for being here for our 8th GPAC meeting, and there's nothing left to be said. We've said all that needed to be said, so we're going to go ahead and close out. I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate you guys hanging in there and look forward to having the next meeting.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you for all your comments this evening. Good night.
Night.
Bye.